Thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. She said later, looking back at it, that the hardest thing for her was having her parents there. She said she needed them there to support her. They did provide her great support. It gave her strength. She loved that they were there to support her. But the single most difficult part of the whole ordeal was that they were there, that specifically she couldn't protect her mom. She couldn't protect her elderly mom and her elderly dad from what happened there in the room.
The most difficult part, my parents were my mother turned 80 on the day of the vote to confirm Clarence Thomas. And I believe the difficult part was to watch my parents, who were elderly people, who had lived good lives and raised their children, and to be honest and truthful and hardworking and all of the things that we want parents to do for their children, to watch them go through it. The sense that they felt that they couldn't protect me from it. And I think it was really hard on them. It undermined their confidence in whether or not the government truly represented them. And for an African-American family, those kinds of questions have existed. And to have it personalized, I think, was really difficult. But I have to say, they were so strong and so wonderful and so supportive, and they never wavered. But it was still hard for me to watch them go through that and know that I couldn't protect them from the feelings that they had.
It was so hard on me to know that I couldn't protect them. It was hard for them to see that they couldn't protect me. It was hard for me to see that I couldn't protect them. That portion of that interview with Anita Hill that you just saw there, that has actually never been aired before. I had seen it in a transcript from that interview they did for the Headliner show for which she was interviewed. Because I had seen that in the transcript, I asked for it to be restored so I could show it tonight. Specifically because this moment for me had always been such a kind of heart-in-your-throat moment from that hearing. That hearing where Anita Hill came forward reluctantly. She did not want to testify. It was after the confirmation hearings for Judge Clarence Thomas were already over. After the close of those hearings, Professor Hill's allegations came to light, and they basically reopened the proceedings to hear from her. And it has always stuck with me, this part that happened right at the very start.
We will make room for your family to be able to sit.
It's a very large family, Chief.
Well,
Senator.
we will begin, but attempt to accommodate as quietly as we can what may be an unusual arrangement. I might ask, is everyone who is sitting behind you necessary and to sit behind you, and maybe they could stand and let your family sit? We must get this hearing moving. There are two chairs on the end here. We will find everyone a seat, but we must begin. Now, Professor Hill, at the risk of everyone behind you standing up, would you be kind enough to introduce your primary family members to us?
Okay. I'd like to introduce, first of all, my father, Albert Hill.
Mr. Hill, welcome.
My mother, Irma Hill.
Ms. Hill.
My mother is going to be celebrating her 80th birthday on the 16th.
Happy birthday in advance.
That chairman there is very recognizable, a much younger Joe Biden, then senator, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. That's, of course, before he went on to multiple runs for president and ultimately the vice presidency for 8 years under President Barack Obama. And as you can see, he's being very kind there to Professor Hill's family. She had just explained in her opening statement that she had grown up on a farm in rural Oklahoma. She was the youngest of 13 children. She and her siblings were raised by those parents, she said, in a deeply religious atmosphere in the Baptist church. She'd explained that that was still a very important part of her life. And then her parents are shown in after she explains it. And then the hearing gets underway. There are parents sitting there behind them, her mother on the eve of her 80th birthday. And then with them sitting there behind her to support her, this is how it goes. And actually, this is almost the best of how it goes. I should tell you, if you have kiddos watching with you tonight at home and you do not want them to hear how this went, this might be a good time to hit pause or hit the mute button.
Can you tell me what incidences occurred, of the ones you've described to us, occurred in his office?
Well, I recall specifically that the incident about the Coke can occurred in his office at the EEOC.
And what was that incident again?
The incident with regard to the Coke can that's
Would you
spelled out in my
describe it
statement.
once again for me, please?
The incident involved his going to his desk, getting up from a work table, going to his desk, looking at this can and saying, "Who put pubic hair on my Coke?"
Was anyone else in his office at the time?
No.
Was the door closed?
I don't recall.
Are there any other incidences that occurred in his office with just in his office period?
There is, I recall at least one instance in his office at the EEOC where he discussed some pornographic material, or he brought up the substance or the content of pornographic material.
And again, it's difficult, but for the record, what substance did he bring up in this instance in his at EEOC in his office? What was the content of what he said?
Well, this was a reference to an individual who had a very large penis, and he used the name that he had been referred to in the pornographic material.
Do you recall what it was?
Yes, I do. The name that was referred to was Long Dong Silver.
Let's go back to the first time that you alleged Judge Thomas indicated he had more than a professional interest in you. Do you recall what the first time was, and what with as much precision as you can, what he said to you?
As I recall, it either happened at lunch or it happened in his office when he said to me very casually, "You ought to go out with me sometime."
You ought to, or you are to?
You ought to.
With regard to the other incidences that you have mentioned in your opening statement, can you tell us how you felt at the time? Were you uncomfortable? Were you embarrassed? Did it not concern you? How did you feel about it?
The pressure to go out with him, I felt embarrassed about, because I had given him an explanation that I thought it was not good for me as an employee working directly for him to go out. I thought he didn't take seriously my decision to say no, and that he did not respect my having said no to him. The conversations about sex, I was much more embarrassed and humiliated by. The two combined really made me feel sort of helpless in a job situation, because I really wanted to do the work that I was doing. I enjoyed that work. But I felt that that was being put in jeopardy by the other things that were going on in the office. And so I was really, really very troubled by it and distressed over it.
Can you tell the committee what was the most embarrassing of all the incidences that you have alleged?
I think the one that was the most embarrassing was his discussion of pornography involving these women with large breasts and engaged in variety of sex with different people or animals. That was the thing that embarrassed me the most and made me feel the most humiliated.
if you can, in his words, not yours, in his words, can you tell us what on that occasion he said to you? You have described the essence of the conversation. In order for us to determine, well, can you tell us in his words what he said?
I really cannot quote him verbatim. I can remember something like, you really ought to see these films that I've seen, or this material that I've seen. This woman has this kind of breast, a breast that measure this size, and they've got her in there with all kinds of things. She's doing all kinds of different sex acts, and that kind of, those were the kinds of words where he expressed his enjoyment of it and seemed to try to encourage me to enjoy that kind of material.
Professor, at your press conference, or one of your press conferences, you said that the issues that you raised about Judge Thomas, you referred to as an ugly issue. Is that how you view these conversations?
Yes, they were very ugly. They were very dirty. They were disgusting.
Were any one of these conversations, this will be my last question, my time is up, were any one of these conversations, other than being asked to go out, were any one of them repeated more than once? The same conversation, reference to?
The reference to his own physical attributes was repeated more than once, yes.
Now again, for the record, did he just say, I have great physical capability and attributes, or was he more graphic?
He was much more graphic.
Can you tell us what he said?
Well, I can tell you that he compared his penis size. He measured his penis in terms of length, those kinds of comments.
Thank you. My time is up under our agreement.
This was 1991. Professor Anita Hill had not sought this out. She had not sought to testify, but she told what she said was the truth about her experience with her former employer, Clarence Thomas, when he was being vetted for the U.S. Supreme Court. They had finished his confirmation hearings, but she had this tale to tell. Her story came out. She ended up testifying. And years later, 25 years later, she said the single hardest thing about that testimony was not being able to protect her elderly parents in that room from hearing what they had to hear. After Chairman Biden went first there, Republican Senator Arlen Specter went right after Joe Biden, and he had some very specific follow-ups he needed to ask Professor Hill, stuff he urgently needed to clear up.
You testified this morning in response to Senator Biden that the most embarrassing question involved, this is not too bad, women's large breasts. That's a word we use all the time. That was the most embarrassing aspect of what Judge Thomas had said to you. No, the most embarrassing aspect was his description of the acts of these individuals, these women, the acts that those particular people would engage in. It wasn't just the breast, it was the continuation of his story about what happened in those films with the people with this characteristic, physical characteristic. With the physical characteristic of? The large breast. Well, in your statement to the FBI, you did refer to the films, but there's no reference to the physical characteristic you described. And I don't want to attach too much weight to it, but I had thought you said that the aspect of the large breasts was the aspect that concerned you, and that was missing from the statement to the FBI.
Then I have been misunderstood. It wasn't the physical characteristic of having large breasts. It was the description of the acts that this person with this characteristic would do, the acts that they would engage in, group acts, acts with animals, things of that nature involving women.
Professor Hill, I'd like you now to turn to page 3 of your statement that you submitted to the committee we got just this morning. And the last sentence on the first full paragraph, you again make on that statement a very serious allegation as to Judge Thomas, and I would ask you why you didn't tell the FBI about that when they interviewed you.
I suppose my response would be the same. I did not tell the FBI all of the information. The FBI agent made clear that if I were embarrassed about talking about something, that I could decline to discuss things that were too embarrassing.
Oh, you thought that was too embarrassing? Well, how do you feel now, Professor Hill? How's this going for you now? How do you feel about having come forward now? Tell me more details about that. That was 1991, which is a long time ago, right? 27 years ago. Senator Biden, of course, moved on from the Senate, became vice president. Senator Specter has since died. Senator Orrin Hatch was on that committee. He literally, at one point, waved around a copy of the book The Exorcist at the hearing and accused Anita Hill of making up some of her claims about Judge Thomas by adapting them from scenes in The Exorcist. Senator Chuck Grassley was on that committee back then, 27 years ago. He's now chair of that committee today. It was an all-male roster on the Judiciary Committee today. It is still now an all-male roster on the Judiciary Committee on the Republican side. But now we're about to get a second chance as a country. Some of those senators from back then are going to have a second chance themselves to figure out how we as a country should hear out allegations of sexual misconduct by a nominee to the United States Supreme Court. Except this time, it's not lurid and extensive allegations of sexual harassment on the job. This time, the accuser of the Supreme Court nominee is alleging attempted rape. Reporter Ryan Grimm at The Intercept was first to report that a serious allegation had been made about Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. That was late Wednesday. By Friday morning, Ronan Farrow and Jane Mayer at The New Yorker were reporting on the rough nature of the allegation, which they dated back to Kavanaugh's time in high school at an elite private academy called Georgetown Prep. By yesterday, Professor Christine Blasey Ford had come forward, saying that although she had tried to protect her anonymity through this process, numerous reporters had apparently learned of her identity, and so she decided that she would come forward on her own terms. And she spoke with Washington Post reporter Emma Brown. We're going to speak with reporter Emma Brown in just a couple of minutes. Professor Blasey has not spoken to anybody other than the Washington Post at this point, though someone leaked the contents of the letter she initially wrote to Senator Feinstein detailing her allegation. That letter has now been published by CNN, and the details in that allegation track with what the Washington Post was able to report based on their interview about the content of Professor Blasey's allegations against Brett Kavanaugh. Now, the nominee is denying the allegation vehemently. He is denying specifically having been present at the party at which Professor Blasey says Brett Kavanaugh drunkenly tried to rape her. Republicans on the committee initially tried to handle this development today by just scheduling a call with Judge Kavanaugh. So staffers working for senators on the Judiciary Committee could ask him questions about the allegations. They thought that's how they'd handle it. Democrats immediately said that was ridiculous. They were not going to join in something like that. So Republicans could say the allegations had been looked into. Then Republicans started telling reporters that if there was going to be any looking into these allegations, surely it would happen, quote, in a closed session. But then after 6 p.m. Eastern tonight, Republican senators met in the office of the top Republican in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, and they emerged from that meeting to announce their decision, which was that, in fact, they will be reopening the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, specifically to hear this allegation against the nominee. Professor Christine Blasey Ford said through her attorney that she will testify under oath. Judge Kavanaugh has also offered to do the same. And so, number one, we now have another week in which more reporting will be done on this story, and during which Christine Blasey Ford will presumably continue to bear the slings and arrows that are now being flung at her from the right for having come forward with this accusation. Number two, this means that the vote that was due to take place on Thursday of this week on Kavanaugh's nomination, that will now not take place on Thursday of this week. But number three, there's now a live issue concerning the FBI. Senator Feinstein, you will remember, referred this attempted rape allegation to the FBI. We learned of that late last week. The FBI did not investigate this allegation. They just added the letter laying out the allegation to the background file they had prepared for the White House on the occasion of Kavanaugh's background check. Now, Bloomberg News reported this afternoon that in order for the FBI to further investigate this allegation as part of Kavanaugh's background check, they would need the White House to request that the FBI do that. The White House has not requested that the FBI should do that. And so now tonight, Senate Democrats have made a formal request to the White House counsel, Don McGahn, formally requesting that the White House, through him, should make that request, should ask the FBI to do due diligence on this allegation against Brett Kavanaugh. And the Senate Democrats want that done now. They want that done before they hold this open hearing on this allegation next week. This is actually just from tonight. We just got this audio in from MSNBC congressional reporters Leanne Caldwell and Frank Thorpe.
Did you ever get a chance to meet with him?
I have not yet.
Yeah,
we have requested several times, many times. I wanted to wait until after the hearings, and we just
the hearings ain't done yet.
Well,
Democrats,
as of today, they weren't.
Some Democrats are concerned because they would prefer the FBI to investigate before there are hearings. Is that?
Well, there needs to be some. Look, I'm an old prosecutor. Okay, I mean, the way this should go is there should be some level of investigation to prepare the committee, in my opinion, whether that's the FBI or whoever it is, to update background checks and to do some level of investigation. That just makes sense to me.
I think there does need to be a public hearing. There's no question about that.
He's scheduled one for next Monday.
There needs to be some investigation first, and I'm not sure that this allows for that.
There's only one path forward, and it's absolutely crystal clear. A complete FBI investigation. If there's a hearing before that investigation, the committee's going to be shooting in the dark with questions. In effect, we are blind, working in the dark. The FBI has to interview those witnesses under oath, all of them. And, if as a former prosecutor and state attorney general, there's no way I would put a crime survivor on the stand in front of a jury, let alone the American people, without a full investigation so that I know what the facts are before I start asking questions. And that's why going ahead on Monday without an FBI investigation and a report from the FBI is just a sham and a charade.
Democrats want the FBI to investigate this allegation that has been referred to them. They need the White House to ask the FBI to do that. Senator Blumenthal saying going ahead on Monday in this open hearing without an FBI investigation is a sham and a charade. Senator Blumenthal will be joining us live in just a moment. But basically, this is a fast evolving story now, right? This has changed 90 degrees and then another 90 degrees and then another 90 degrees and then it took off on another axis, all just since this afternoon. So do not check out on this story. We are living through history here. And of course, This comes in the midst of an absolutely wild and hugely consequential news environment. I mean, the storm that started as Hurricane Florence will not quit. The death toll now in the Carolinas is up to 31 Americans as of tonight. This devastating flooding continues and continues to spread. Even though the storm made landfall late last week, some rivers in the worst affected areas will not crest until tomorrow night. So the flooding is continuing to get worse even now. We're going to have more on that coming up, including the latest on a really serious pollution problem and even a nuclear alert in North Carolina just today because of this flooding. Also, we learned today that Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn is finally going to be sentenced. He pled guilty in the Russia investigation and signed an agreement to cooperate with prosecutors started an agreement to cooperate with prosecutors in the special counsel's office. We now know that in the last week of November, so after the midterm elections, they now plan to finally sentence Mike Flynn for the felony charge to which he pled guilty. That means, among other things, that in court filings between now and his sentence, we're going to learn how much cooperating Mike Flynn has actually been doing. We will get a description of the extent and the helpfulness of his cooperation from prosecutors in the special counsel's office starting relatively soon now that they have scheduled his sentencing. We also just got this statement from the White House tonight announcing that the president has ordered the declassification of a whole bunch of internal FBI and Justice Department documents from the ongoing Russia investigation. He's going to start making public more text messages among FBI and DOJ officials and specific pages from the applications for search warrants and FBI materials related to Bruce Ohr, who was the top Justice Department official working on Russian organized crime and its connections to the Russian government. Bruce Ohr is now the next senior law enforcement or intelligence official who the president seems intent on destroying. We have not yet seen any of these documents that the president tonight has ordered declassified, but they'll reportedly start pumping them out over the next few days. We'll have more on that coming up as well, including a very stark warning from one well-informed Democrat who is very alarmed about this turn of events. So there's been a world of news breaking over the course of today and particularly into tonight. But if you have a sense right now as an American that you are living through history, it's because you are. You are living through nearly unprecedented scandal and drama surrounding a very troubled presidency. You are living through the most consequential counterintelligence and criminal investigation of a sitting U.S. president ever. Right this second tonight, you are living through one of the most controversial and unpopular Supreme Court nominations ever in the history of this country. This is history. But just because it's history doesn't mean it can't sometimes rhyme with some of the most traumatic political and cultural events we have already lived through. We've got the reporter who broke the story open on these allegations against Brett Kavanaugh here with us live. Next, we've got Senator Blumenthal joining us live in just a few minutes. A big night tonight. We'll be right back.
My name is Anita F. Hill, and I am a professor of law at the University of Oklahoma. I was born on a farm in Okmulgee County, Oklahoma in 1956. I am the youngest of 13 children. I had my early education in Okmulgee County. My father, Albert Hill, is a farmer in that area. My mother's name is Irma Hill. She is also a farmer and a housewife. My childhood was one of a lot of hard work and not much money. But it was one of solid family affection as represented by my parents.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.